For more than 5 years, political reporters in upstate New York have been receiving press releases from attorney Leslie Danks Burke, a Democrat who tried twice to knock off an incumbent Republican state senator in a red part of upstate and is now engaged in a third bid for state senate. And while Democratic candidates in this type of political environment might tack to the right or stress their conservative bona fides, Danks Burke has rejected the idea that candidates need to moderate their views when facing a challenging political climate. In response to an endorsement questionnaire from the far-left Working Families Party, Danks Burke wrote, quote, "When we are honest about our values, build trust, and do the work, we achieve real progressive victories, such as my double-digit reach into conservative turf." And she joins us now to discuss this approach to politics, as well as the launch of her Trailblazers PAC. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thanks very much, Dave.
So, for starters, can you talk a little bit about your political ideology, including some of the positions you believe in, and talk about unabashedly, which on their face might not endear you to conservative or moderate voters?
Well, I'm of the view that we are in a post-partisan world where the arguments between left and right and red and blue and conservative and progressive are really getting conflated. We see a lot of hyped up animosity and antagonism. But in my view, we all have a lot more in common than divides us. And one clear example of that I've harped on for about 10, 15 years now across upstate New York is New York's very regressive tax structure, where folks who have the least are expected to contribute the most. And what do I mean by that? We've got a property tax system in upstate New York that funnels into our Medicaid program, which is a program that is supposed to help folks who can't afford health care to pay for their doctor's bills. And what ends up happening is because we pay for that out of our property tax structure, which no other state in the country does, we end up charging the poorest counties the most in order to keep that system propped up. We've got to change that sort of approach. And that is something that really appeals to people, whether they consider themselves conservative or progressive. They see the flat out unfairness of a system where the folks at the tippity top are getting away with paying nothing while the rest of us are picking up the steam.
Well, I imagine if you have enough time with someone, you can explain and maybe even convince someone that is more conservative leaning that they should support changes to the tax structure and support, taxes on wealthy New Yorkers to offset changes to the property tax structure. But what about other positions, like some of the criminal justice positions you have, like making parole more accessible, talking about racial justice? How do you engage primarily white people in upstate New York on issues like that, where they're more likely to be much more conservative?
Well, again, I think that Americans have a basic sense of fairness. We are a government of and by and for the people. We started out with a constitution that recognized that all are created equal. Unfortunately, back in the constitutional words, back in the 1700s, they said all men are created equal, and we've had to struggle and endure for 250 years to try and get that closer to the ideal that all people are created equal. But Americans understand that in their bones, whether they consider themselves conservative or progressive. So when you're talking about, parole or whatever other issue you might be talking about, if you can sit down and have a conversation, and I really do believe in having those conversations, I believe in getting past sound bites and really coming face to face and talking with people, then you can recognize that we've got a system in this country where if you're rich, you can buy your way out of jail, and if you're not rich, you can't, and that isn't fair.
You made the case that we're in this post-partisan environment, and while if you ask most people, they will say, yeah, the two-party system is failing us. In actuality, it seems like we are more hyper-partisan than ever, with people at the end of the day retrenching to the Democratic and Republican lines, especially in national elections. So what makes you feel like there is a willingness for people to shake their, say, party allegiance and potentially cross party lines when it comes to voting, say, in a state Senate election?
Well, I can say that because I've lived it. I ran in a district that's only 32% Democratic, and we pulled 45% of the vote. So that meant that, there were 13% of people out there who didn't identify with what I consider my particular values. But once we sat down and had a conversation, they recognized that, hey, we're all in this together, and actually we agree on more than we disagree on. So you have enough of those conversations and you live that experience for long enough, as I have here in upstate New York, and you begin to realize that actually we're not as angry with each other as we might think we are, or as we might be being told that we are. I have a theory that there's a lot of power centered in a very few hands, and those few hands tend to keep us arguing with each other in order to retain that power for themselves. I'm a mom. I've led Girl Scout troops. I've spent a lot of time on kindergarten playgrounds, and you can bet that anytime you see two little kids fighting over something, a big kid has probably just run away with the ball. And I think that that's what we're dealing with in American politics.
So the traditional strategy for winning elections when facing an enrollment disadvantage is to build support across the aisle by breaking with your own party, on some issues. I think of the Blue Dog Democrats in the 2006 national wave and moderate GOP governors that we have now, like in Maryland and Massachusetts. Based on those experiences, why would you reject that strategy, which has been a winner for at least some candidates, and still keep plugging away with your approach, which has been unsuccessful in 2016 and 2020?
Well, first of all, I dispute that it was unsuccessful.
I'm talking
dealing
to
with
Leslie Danks Burke, not state senator. So, if your goal was to be state senator, then it was unsuccessful.
My goal is to make sure that all voices get heard.
Okay.
And that should be an American goal. And when a district is gerrymandered, as we've seen the districts so heftily gerrymandered upstate by the Republican majority in 2010, we've been dealing with districts that are wildly disadvantaging a lot of the voices that are inside of them. When you manage to pull a group of people together who raise their voice anyway, despite that very tilted playing field, that to me is a tremendous success. And sure, it hurts to lose. There is no doubt that it is painful as a candidate to lose a race, especially when I pour my heart and soul into it the way that I do. But I look around at what we've built and at the connections that we've made and the people whose voices we've raised, even in the darkness. And that, to me, is a tremendous success. If you lay down and ignore the problem when the going gets tough, then there's going to be nothing left for you.
So I was pretty struck by your latest campaign filing, in which you reported more than $100,000, which to me seems impressive for a race based on the district that we're talking about, at least at the time you're doing the fundraising, which leans heavily Republican. So what's your fundraising pitch, and why do you feel like you've been comparatively successful to candidates who face similar uphill enrollment challenges and don't bring in the bucks like that?
Well, I pitch directly to the folks who are going to be voting for me. One of the things that's really exciting about that tally that we managed to raise, even before there was a district, in fact, when we don't know what the district lines are, is that we raised that $100,000, 90% of it, from people who were in the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes and Central New York regions. And that's what I really prioritize in a fundraising campaign, is making sure that I am accountable directly to the people who are going to be voting for me and whose interests I am expected to represent when I get to Albany. And I think that that is a powerful message to bring to voters, and it also creates long-term endurance that I've demonstrated over the years, but that is about much more than me as a candidate. It's about raising a voice for all of us. And obviously, candidates come and go, and there's a lot of transactional donors who participate in New York State politics, and, folks in New York City or folks in Albany who might donate to whichever way the wind seems to be blowing at that time. But when you reach directly into the communities that you're seeking to represent, and you build those long-term relationships, and people know that you've got their back, then they're willing to stick with you for the long haul. And I think that that's what's demonstrated.
Well, speaking of the 2022 race, we're talking on Tuesday afternoon, and we're just now getting to look at the proposed state legislative boundaries for this fall. And it looks like the district that you would have been running in as someone who lives in the town of Ithaca has changed dramatically, and the district now includes parts of Binghamton and stretches into the eastern part of Cortland County. And looking at this analysis by my friends over at the CUNY Graduate Center, says this is a district that Biden would have amassed 58% of the vote in. Is this your understanding of what district you could potentially be running in the fall? And if so, that has to feel a lot better than the district you might have otherwise faced, especially compared to 2016 and 2020.
I certainly don't count on anything coming out of Albany until it is sealed and in black and white, but that's my understanding as of this morning. And yes, geographically it is different, although not wholly different, because now what we have is all of Tompkins County together in one district, whereas up until now, for the last 10 years, the Republicans had gerrymandered fairly liberal Tompkins County into 3 different Republican districts.
Right.
So Tompkins County is where I live, and now it's all together in one. But when you look at the district that is designed now as the new 53rd, it's actually very similar to the districts that I've run in before, because it is small cities and rural communities that connect those cities. And a lot of those interests are the same as the interests that I've been standing up and advocating for the last 15 years. So I really do believe that this is an opportunity to get a voice for this entire Southern Tier and Finger Lakes area that has been left out for so long, and I'm really excited to get in there and do it.
And finally, along the way of your personal political journey, you've launched the Trailblazers Political Action Committee, which backs candidates who, quote unquote, commit to getting politics out of the back room onto the front porch. What does that mean? And based on the candidates you're backing, is this about creating a farm team for future races, or is it just about improving local politics?
It's about addressing the systemic problem in American politics where money corrupts the political conversation. And what we have done at Trailblazers PAC is, for 5 years, invested in exclusively local candidates. So you're right, it's just a hyper-local program. We have not looked at state level or federal level candidates, but anywhere in the country who take real action, demonstrable action for honest government. And they do that by following higher ethical standards than the law currently requires. And the upshot of that is when they do meet those requirements and follow those higher transparency and disclosure standards, then it's sort of like the New York City Matching Funds Program or the Matching Funds Program that is likely to become law here in New York State in the next year, where the amount of money that they raise from voters in their districts then gets matched and in a contribution toward their candidacy.
My understanding, based on looking at the website, is that this is not necessarily a partisan PAC. You guys will back Republicans, is that correct?
Exactly. Just like other matching funds programs, obviously this is a private PAC. We're not a governmental entity, so we can't call ourselves similar to the New York City Matching Funds Program in that way. But just like any other organization that is trying to push for good government and push for more transparency, we want to see Republicans just as willing to be transparent and to accept election results as anybody else.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We've been speaking with Leslie Danks Burke. She's a Democratic State Senate candidate in the Southern Tier. Leslie, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by the New York State AFL-CIO, a federation of 3,000 unions fighting for working people by keeping New York State union strong. UnionStrongNY.com for more information.